Hello, and welcome to Iowa Ideas. This is our ninth year of Iowa Ideas, an event that explores topics that are important to Iowans. We are excited for a great 2 days of discussion. The Gazette would like to give a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for their support of this event, ensuring it remains free to all attendees. Today, we will be discussing teacher shortage areas in K-12 education. My name is Grace King, and I'm the education reporter at the Gazette. Today, I am joined by our panelists, Joshua Brown, middle school special education and social studies teacher who is currently serving as the president of the Iowa State Education Association, Michelle Johnson, government relations director at the Iowa Association of School Boards, Dr. Jay Pennington with the Iowa Department of Education, and Colleen Mulholland, Dean of the College of Education at the University of Northern Iowa, and Mark McDermott, Associate Dean of the College of Education at the University of Iowa. Thank you all for being here today. Our audience can submit questions to our panel by entering them into the Q&A box or the chat, and we will work them into our conversation. Today, we'll be talking about the 28 teacher shortage areas listed in an analysis by the Iowa Department of Education. This includes teaching areas like special education, science, art, and physical education. Why is there a shortage in these teaching areas, and how do Iowa schools address it? So let's start. Jay, could you start by explaining to us what it means for a teaching job to be listed as a teaching shortage area and why these positions are listed?
Sure. So the department collects data from all public districts in the state annually in order to actually fulfill a federal teacher shortage area report. So all states, collect similar data. We're actually collecting data for the 25-26 school year right now, and that'll be available later this year. But what we do is we ask districts to report the number of unfilled positions at the start of the school year that went unfilled in the prior year. So if they had a special education position, as an example, that they tried to fill last spring and still remained vacant after their searches over the summer, they would report that as an example. So, of the 327 school districts, there were 661 teacher vacancies reported at the start of the 24-25 school year, which is that source of data goes to that federal teacher shortage area report. And basically, those 28 were the aggregation across all the districts. Even if there was like one vacancy, it was included in that number of 28 different shortage areas. So that's kind of how it works and where those numbers come from. I think the other thing that's important is, and we'll get more into this, but we're able to report rather all 28 shortage areas because our vacancy rates are relatively low compared to other states. So part of that federal report is they're asking states to report up to 5% of their shortage areas. So some states might have 4 or 5 particular areas, but because their vacancy rates are higher, they're only able to report 4. So we're sort of in an advantageous position for being able to report so many, which leads into other things like loan forgiveness programs, which that report targets Iowa to be able to provide loan forgiveness to candidates that are interested in teaching in those areas. So that's in a nutshell where those data come from.
That's great. My husband actually teaches special education, and he's one of those teachers who have been able to take advantage of those loan forgiveness programs. So, Joshua, I think you said that you were touring schools across the state as part of your year in the presidency. So can you talk about what you see in terms of teacher shortage areas and where specifically those are most challenging?
Yeah, I've been going around the state last year and this year. I've been to at least over 55 districts, almost 20 this year already, and being able to talk to members and other educators and administration about what's going on, what's going well, what's not going well, what are things they would like to see changed. And one of the topics that comes up regularly is the difficulty of filling vacant positions. And so sometimes they're able to fill it with somebody on an emergency license, or sometimes they're able to get a candidate or two candidates to come in and be able to fill that role for the year. And in other instances, they just give up. They don't have quality candidates filling, so they just eliminate the position altogether. And so we know that impact on education in our classrooms means that either educators are doing more with less, or they are in classrooms that have more students in them. So higher class size, less individualized attention to our students, less opportunity, less time to interact with parents and families. And so all of those kind of things occur. But we have seen some examples as I've traveled around the state that there are districts that are completely full. That have filled every single one of their positions. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with their ability to retain their staff, to have less vacancies that they have to fill over the summer, less vacancies that they have to find highly qualified candidates for. And so there are some models out there of great districts doing the right thing, keeping their staff and working towards filling those positions. But I've been in rural districts and urban districts that have vacancies, and I've been in some of both that don't. So I think that it's kind of all over the board. It's not just like it's only in central Iowa or only in western Iowa or only in urban districts that are facing less applicants or end up starting the school year with a position or two vacant.
Can we drill down on where the teacher shortage areas are most severe? I think special education is one of those areas. And Joshua, you are a special education teacher.
Yeah, I mean, special education by far has been the most common vacancy hole that I have seen. I think sometimes, especially in rural Iowa, we're seeing some ag teacher vacancies or some special or like foreign language, like a Spanish teacher vacancy, which is leading students to have to take their foreign language on a computer. And so like my son, he was in Baxter, Iowa, and he had a Spanish teacher his freshman year. And then his sophomore and junior, senior year, it was Edgenuity teaching Spanish at that school rather than a certified teacher here in the state. So I think that there are some different things. I mean, I think science, of course, has been a high needs area for the last few years. Mathematics, some CTE programs. We see some of that across the state as I've been traveling around.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Grace, I think what is emerging in this conversation so far really is matching what we're seeing in emerging studies. And so there's new research that is moving us beyond like the headlines of kind of that abstract teacher shortage. And it's really helping us get to a deeper understanding of those teacher shortages. So instead of treating it as this national crisis, new research coming out of Brown University under Edwards and her team is they're starting to establish a framework that's showing exactly what we're talking about here, that shortages are highly localized, driven by geography, school conditions, compensation, and that subject-specific demand. And so it's really forcing us on the prep side to not think in broad generalizations, but in very targeted context-specific solutions.
When you say school conditions, are you talking specifically about facilities?
Not necessarily. I think there's longstanding data and surveys that show that teacher pay isn't the end-all be-all about the profession. Opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to work with the community and continue to thrive as a school community partnership. There's lots of conditions that go along with the daily work of a teacher that's beyond pay.
Sure.
Yeah. I would just say, like, on that, Lamar's. Go ahead, Michelle. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, from what I've learned on those conditions, if you have those experienced teachers in your school district, which is why retention is so important, that helps those newer teachers kind of learn the ropes. They don't feel so alone. So having a teacher mentor and things like that can really help new teachers. So that's all part of that school culture, and why retaining those more experienced teachers is so important and has become harder. So that's another point to make in this teacher shortage. It's not just getting new people into education, it's keeping those people around.
Yeah, as I was having conversations with educators in Lamar's school district just this last, I think it was Monday, Monday or Tuesday. I can't remember it now. But this week, they were talking about how they would never leave their school district because they feel supported. They feel like their district listens to them. They are able to collectively bargain a vast array of topics and aren't just limited to base wage. They are able to talk and have conversations. They have a labor management team that meets regularly to talk about issues to improve working conditions, and hear that they believe that they're being respected, that their voice matters, and they feel that people care that they have a safe learning environment, safe working conditions in their district. Their caseloads, their class sizes are manageable. All of those things are occurring, which is keeping people there. And they're then the best recruiters to try to get other people to come and join their district as well.
So just wanted to, again, mention a couple of, I think, critical data related to this conversation. And so the top 5 areas within the state from last fall were special education, science, English language arts, math, and music in terms of what those need areas were. Josh mentioned a few of those. But the total number statewide was 661 positions that we're talking about that went unfilled, which represents less than 2% or 1.74% of the total vacancies. So context in terms of, what need areas exist. Those do tend to be more concentrated in rural areas. So, roughly 74% of districts in Iowa are considered rural. That vacancy rate is about 2% of their total employment data are in rural areas. But only 35% of the teacher workforce actually works in rural schools. So just again, context, I think, just talking about retention, when we look at the last decade, we see very stable numbers. So a decade ago, retention was at 91.3 percentage points. And the most recent year-to-year data we have, it's 91.2%. So virtually the same in terms of, the numbers that are deciding to stay in the profession.
Yeah. And those numbers don't seem dire, but when you're talking about special education, those are students who legally require specialized, individualized learning opportunities. And if there's not teachers to teach that, or if teachers are being given rosters that are too large to truly be considered individualized learning opportunities, that can create some big challenges and lead to escalating student behaviors too.
Yeah, I mean, 2%. Go ahead, Mark.
That's okay. Well, I think what we're sort of all coalescing on here is this idea that this is not a simple issue. Like it's easy. People. The McDermott family, we have this running joke for the last 4 years. At the start of the school year, Dad gets asked to go on TV and talk about the teacher shortage, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm saying all the things everybody's saying here over and over, right? We don't look at it like it's the teacher shortage. We look at it like it's a teacher shortage for an individual district or an individual school that is looking to fill a specific position, right? And so it's sometimes easier to discuss it in these broad terms, but it's much more nuanced. It's much more context specific, like everybody said. And then, like you're starting to bring up, Grace, in terms of looking at some of these specific positions and specific content areas. One of the things we talked about historically in our state has been, well, what if we have like an all science endorsement where a student can get certified a little more quickly, a little more efficiently in teaching lots of different content areas within science, biology and chemistry and earth science and physics, right? That's a great idea. And sometimes that looks really attractive, for a rural district to say, let's bring in one teacher who can teach all of these subjects. What we sometimes forget to, ask is what about the prospective teacher? And when I deal with pre-service students, sometimes what they're telling me is, Mark, I don't really want to get that all science endorsement. And it's not because they don't want to help. It's actually because they're very conscientious and they say, I don't know if I feel comfortable teaching physics, and I don't know if I do as great a job as I should be doing. And so it's a complicated issue. It's not just as simple as saying, hey, get as many endorsements as you can. That's better for everybody. These individual teachers have very specific desires. They have very specific concerns about where they want to live or where they don't want to live geographically, all those sorts of things. And I think that's where, what I enjoy about this conversation is we're all kind of acknowledging that, yes, there's statistics and yes, there's different ways for us to categorize, but in reality, every individual district, every individual school, and really every individual teacher has these very specific, unique contextual issues that are playing a role for them. And I think we got to make sure we're talking to the people that are engaged, the individuals engaged, and getting their sense on this as well.
We do have a question from the audience here. Has the number of teachers needed in disciplines where there is a shortage changed? In other words, has the demand for special education teachers increased in recent years, or has the number of special education teachers remained the same? But there are fewer teachers to fill them.
So I'll start and others can jump in. There's a lot sort of packaged into this question. So let's talk about, context around the percent of students that need special education, which has remained relatively stable. In the most recent year, it's just under 14 percentage points, and it fluctuates between 12 and 14% in any given year. With that said, roughly 16.5% of the educator workforce statewide, which is about 38,000 teachers, are special education teachers. Special education has been a need area both in Iowa and nationally for decades. Actually, in thinking about this conversation today, I took a look at some work that we had done with Iowa State going back 15 years. So this has been my point is that it has been a longstanding need area. As Mark mentioned, these are wicked problems. They're difficult to address. So, the state has taken a multi-pronged approach to try to address the issue, not just with one program, but multiple programs. So one that I'll mention, and I could go on, but I'll try to provide time for others to speak. But the teacher and paraeducator apprenticeship program, that TPRA program that the state launched about 2 years ago, put $49 million into creating pathways for folks to be able to, that were paras that wanted to either become special education teachers or teachers that just wanted to get to teach. That over 1,000 folks have taken advantage of that program, and roughly 170 are working to get a special education degree to be able to help fill that vacancy. So just a few things that the state is doing and some contextual data around this wicked problem.
And I think that's a great example that I can illustrate how when the state has an initiative and how we are responding on the prep side. So in response to the TPRA, when it first came out a couple of years ago, we took a hard look at our elementary education and special education endorsement pathways. And we developed a program called the Purple Pathway for Paraeducators, which we've seen now who's enrolled. We see almost 100 students who will, and some have already graduated and are already working, but some are still in that pipeline. And it's addressing exactly what we're talking about. This is a very localized solution, allows for paraeducators to use their work site with the support of their building administrator as the clinical experience and the prep that they need to complete a bachelor's degree and earn both elementary education K-6 endorsement and the Strategist 1 endorsement, which is a special education endorsement. The grow your own, if you will, type pathway has been quite beneficial to school districts because particularly paraeducators are rooted in the community. They have deep understanding of the culture of the school and the culture of the community, and they stay and they thrive. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Jay. That's a great example of one of a host of ways to try to deal with that hyper localization and what those targeted needs are for specific school districts.
I think that's a really good example. I mean, it's a good example of a really good program. It's also a good example of, a lot of if you ask a lot of our elementary ed students here at Iowa, why did you want to become a teacher? They'll tell you about an experience they had as an elementary student or a teacher they had that was, very, very impactful in their development, and they want to, that's what they want to be like. Or one of our, music ed students will say, I had a great music teacher, right? I think one of the things that is important about, working with our paras or pipelines like that is oftentimes that's the experience that drives them into thinking, oh, that's what I want to do. Where they may not have had an experience as a student utilizing special education services, but they have had an experience as a para working in classrooms and working with other special education educators. And that's what then gives them that sort of like, I would really love to be able to do that as well. And that's a context to the issue that we don't always think about. Like, what is it that is that prompt for that individual to decide that's the area that they want to go into, or that's the specific content that they want to deal with as a teacher, if they've had some of those experiences. I don't want to put you on the spot, Michelle, but you said something the other day that I thought was really important in terms of another aspect of, it's not always just did we fill the position or not. There's also some other variables. I'm hoping you remember which part.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. I think I do. So yes, like it's kind of been mentioned, sometimes districts, when they have an open position, they maybe only get one applicant and it's not exactly what they're looking for. So either you don't hire them or you maybe hire someone who isn't fully qualified, and that's not always their fault. They just don't have the experience. So you're kind of putting them into a role where they're not set up to succeed. And then you end up replacing that role soon or adding another teacher into that room. Another thing that we see a lot in districts is teachers on a conditional license. So they're working towards that full licensure, but they're not at this time fully licensed in that area. Sometimes that happens in special education. You were talking about like a science endorsement. Sometimes, a teacher is licensed to teach chemistry and we kind of slip them into physics for a little bit. And so they don't feel as comfortable. And so while the vacancies are technically filled, it's maybe not with the highest quality candidate. No fault of those teachers. It's just not exactly where they want to be. And so that's kind of another area of this. It's not exactly a shortage where the position's just left open. It's just maybe not filled with someone who would be the ideal candidate in that classroom or situation.
Yeah. Going a little further down that path, we've talked about, how we can maybe find teachers through a parent-to-teacher pathway program, those sorts of things. But what about retaining teachers in these specialized roles? How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, I think on the retention end, I think it really comes down to making sure that teachers in your school district feel respected. They feel that they have support from their administration. They have support from their fellow colleagues. They have support from the community. That those seem to be the biggest drivers when we do our exit surveys of members that are leaving their districts, that they just didn't feel supported. They didn't feel like they had the autonomy to teach the curriculum. They felt like there were outside pressures or attacks getting put on them that unfairly made them just feel more pressure that they needed to have, and it wasn't the job they thought they were signing up for. And in other places, especially around special education, we need to find ways to manage their workload, because like you said, like that's where some of the biggest shortage areas are. And because those services have to be provided, that means that a special education teacher is serving more students than is ideal in a lot of those places. And so trying to figure out ways to reduce some of their workload so that they can be manageably support their students and collaborate with their colleagues to give the most effective learning possible to our students.
Yeah, Colleen, Mark, I don't know if you in your positions talk with school districts about solutions on this or how to talk about it in teacher education courses.
We do. I think that's actually a really important aspect is the conversations, discussion we have with our district partners, understanding their needs, but also understanding, kind of like Josh was saying, what is it that you're seeing in your district that's leading to people making decisions to choose a different path or choose a different profession? And so there's this aspect of, professionalism. How do we help the teachers feel like they're being treated as professionals? We're in a very unique position as an educator where, most people have been students. And so a lot of people think, well, I know what it means to be a teacher. There's not that much to it, or it's fairly easy to learn to be a teacher. Those of us that have been in the classroom for a while might argue with that perspective and say there's a lot of things that we have to understand in order to work with 30 human beings all at the same time and try to create the best learning environment for all of those humans in there. And so I think there's an aspect of that. How do we help people feel like this is a profession you can go into where your expertise, your training, the things that you did that maybe other people haven't done is valued. I think that's important. But then the thing to balance there is, and this is, we're starting to look at, in terms of induction programs, how could we stay connected with our graduates after they go into the teaching profession, right? So we're going to graduate 250 or so students this year from our program that'll be first year teachers. And what our question is, how do we stay connected? Oftentimes what will happen is we'll reach out to them and try to, this happened especially right after COVID. We had a lot of conversation about how can we help those students that went through a pretty unique training period in student teaching. And so we would reach out to them and say, hey, we'd love to create kind of a professional learning community. We'd love to do a virtual group, just network, stay together. And they'd be really honest and they'd say, Mark, that's a great idea. Thank you so much for asking. There's no way I have enough time to do that. Like they just did not want to add one more thing on top because they were so conscientious about what they were doing to do, their day-to-day work. And so what we're trying to figure out is how can we make this advantageous in terms of maybe combine an induction program experience that's also wrapped up in graduate work? How do we combine networking amongst different districts and different geographic locations? How do we provide resources and allow for the sharing of resources that's a part of that induction? So it is a network to stay connected. It's a place to have honest conversation, but it's also providing you these tools that might be beneficial and hearing about what other people are finding for tools as they go through it. So that's what we're trying to do.
And we, like Mark said, we certainly talk to our pre-service teachers about well-being and thinking about the well-roundedness of, when you're adulting and those kinds of things, that to remember not to bite off more than they can chew as new career professionals. And I could take it a bit of a different way too. I think when we're working with our PK-12 school partners, we really rely on them as an extension of our classroom. And in many ways, they're finding rebirth or excitement in helping us train future teachers. So we seek anywhere from 18 to 2,000 classroom placements a semester at UNI. And that's from early classroom clinical experience all the way up through student teaching. And that is across the state. So as we're seeing our online transfer programs and our online programs grow, we really have more and more connections, river to river, quite frankly, in all of the districts. And so being a mentor teacher, being a cooperating teacher for a student teacher, there's that professional connection back to best practice, back to mentoring. And we do find that our extended classroom of mentor teachers across the state, that they want to keep working with us. They want to host more student teachers because there's something in that about giving back, but also about training their future colleagues alongside of them.
So just to tie a couple of these thoughts together, I commend both UNI and University of Iowa, the work that they're doing to, provide these really quality in-classroom experiences so that when someone's has graduated and now is in a classroom, they're ready to go, hopefully, to address their classroom, both from a content pedagogy standpoint, but also from a classroom behavior and management strategy as well. So the preparedness piece is really important. That induction and mentoring that Mark mentioned is also a critical piece. I mean, the state level in particular, and this, nationally, this is a known issue. And that is, if you can get that teacher to year 5, they're likely to stay long-term in the profession. So there's this sort of critical period of preparedness to, okay, now I'm managing a classroom, and hopefully there's a great mentor that's there that you're able to work with to provide that bridge into career. That's really critical in terms of increasing those retention rates.
I would, and I just, one last thing, Grace, sorry, but to build off what Jay said there, I think this is important too. And sometimes, we have to remember that first-year teachers are first-year teachers. They are, I don't mean to make this all about Mark's journey, but like I can remember, my dad was a teacher. I had my dad in geometry class when I was a sophomore in high school. I thought he did a pretty good job. He was my dad, right? When my first year teaching, I can remember one of the most liberating conversations I had was I talked to my dad on the phone, halfway through the year. And I was saying, Dad, I'm frustrated. I'm not doing this nearly as well as you did. You were such a good teacher. I'm not even close to that. And finally he said, Mark, when you had me as a teacher, how many years had I been teaching? Right. And I was like, 18 years. Right. Well, he's like, I should have been maybe a little better at teaching after 18 years than you would be in your very first year of teaching, right? And I think something like what I talked about earlier, where a lot of our teacher candidates have this picture in their head of this great teacher that is the reason they went into teaching, and that's great, but it kind of cuts both ways, because then that first year they're thinking, wow, I'm not anywhere, I'm not there yet. I'm not like, well, you've got some time to grow. And this is, I think, sort of realizing there aren't a lot of professions where we expect the first year person in that profession to be perfect at it. I have a feeling, I don't know how good I am at teaching now after 30 years, but I think I'm a little better than I was back in 1995. And so I think that we have to sort of help our students realize that on one hand, there is no perfect answer. I wish Colleen and I could give you the handbook that says, do this every single time, and it's going to work, and life's going to be great, and you're going to be the best teacher ever. That's not realistic. What we're trying to do is prepare these young people who are really committed to then say, I'm going to keep getting better at this, and I'm going to keep working at this, and I'm going to keep figuring out new things, because as I have more experience, it's going to give me things that I can build on. And I think sometimes, our expectations for them are so high. I'm not asking for us to have low expectations, but I think we have to remember this is new for them, and we're helping them, and it's okay to get better as you go through it, and not expect that you got to know everything coming right out of college.
Yeah. Yeah, especially at 22 years old.
That's what I would argue. Yeah.
Michelle, could you talk about, are there things that could be done legislatively or policy-wise to address some of these challenges of filling and retaining teachers, especially in these specialized areas?
Yeah, so legislation is kind of the world I live in. I know it's not the answer to everything, but there are a few things that we think could help. One is maybe paying student teachers. This is basically an unpaid job for those student teachers. They're paying tuition at their university, and then they're also working in a classroom. It doesn't really leave them time to have another job. So that is a barrier to entry for some students. We would want to make this equitable across the state. So probably having state funding, because some districts could afford to do this right now. If it were allowed, but others couldn't. And then that would put the districts who couldn't pay a student teacher probably at a disadvantage, because those student teachers often come back to that district where they student taught. But that's one idea we have. Additionally, opening up more sources of funding to pay maybe a recruitment or a retention bonus to teachers. Some districts have, extra funds that just aren't allowed to be used for this right now. School funding is a whole nother thing, so I won't bore you with that. But there's kind of restrictions on funds. So if we could use some of them, maybe to pay a retention bonus to a teacher for being there for a certain amount of years, that could help with the retention aspect of it. I know we've talked about how teacher pay isn't the end all be all, but it does help. These people need to be able to make a living. They are professionals. So Iowa has recently increased the minimum teacher salary, which was amazing. It was helpful for a lot of these smaller districts to be able to get up to even close to some of the districts who pay more. We've talked a lot about special education, which requires paraeducators, and that's something where there is no required minimum salary. The state has made the past several years kind of extra payments to districts that could be targeted for support staff at schools, which includes those paraeducators. So if we could somehow provide more money for those paras, it would be great, because unfortunately, in a lot of communities, especially in rural Iowa, the Casey's is paying more than the school district. And that's just the reality we face. And so some of these people would love to be a para, but they just can't financially make it work. So not to tie everything back to money, but that's a lot of what we can do legislatively, at least.
Yeah, I think a piece of the legislative action is making sure that what is getting passed to the legislator is supporting schools and supporting their efforts in doing these things and not villainizing them.
So just to piggyback on some of the legislative things that have happened, Michelle mentioned raising the minimums. So an additional $122 million over the last 2 fiscal years has been put into the teacher salary supplement to raise the minimum salary for beginning teachers to $50,000 and career teachers to $62,000. Another thing that has happened, Michelle mentioned flexibility. The Teacher Leadership and Compensation Program, which was started a little over a decade ago, created additional pathways for educators to be able to work with other teachers, to support, to coach, instead of just being, nothing wrong with being a classroom teacher, but in some cases, taking on additional duties and working with teachers was another strategy in order to increase retention overall. I bring up that program because it did create over $150 million to increase the educator workforce, which during that past decade increased by 9 percentage points overall. And 3 years ago, we had over 38,000 teachers, which is the most number the state has ever seen. But that program more recently, the legislative change was to allow for additional uses of funds. So being able to either pay bonuses for specific areas such as special education would be allowable with that increased flexibility and use of funds. So a few things that have happened to try to help with some of these issues that we've talked about.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, funding is always great. Colleen, Mark, do you see this working? Is this a solution that has been met with success?
I'm not sure I have a one-to-one stories related to that, but I will say that, today's college student is looking to be valued, and they're really consumers and looking at, will my transfer credits be honored? Will I be able to find a job? Will I be able to contribute? And these efforts that are quite important for our state and for the profession, there are pre-service teachers, no matter what age they are, because we also have career changers who are coming back for initial licensure. They see that there's value being added to this profession at the state level, and I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I think as school districts are increasingly focused on college and career planning too, career pathways, how does that expand the opportunity for people who didn't initially go into the teaching profession to maybe take a second look? It seems like there's more specialized programs than ever before.
That's it's an interesting question. I use the example of, I started out as a high school teacher. I worked at 3 different districts. I did, coaching. I worked at ACT for a while. I taught at Wartburg. I came here. And then 5 years ago, I became associate dean. That was after, 7 or 8 different positions. I don't think that the reason I didn't become an associate dean until my 26th year of teaching was because I didn't have a career pathway in high school for being an associate dean. It wasn't like, if I had had the associate deaning pathway, I would have become an associate dean sooner. I think what was great about my experience, I've already mentioned my dad was one of those teachers and he was the principal, so obviously I'm a little biased, but I think what was great was it allowed me to think about specific careers, but it also gave me skills that I could utilize in a variety of careers if I changed my mind or if I thought differently. And so I think what's really an opportunity for us right now as we start thinking about, different pathways, and even, working with our community college partners and looking at, college credit coursework in the community college. I'm lucky enough, I get to teach a class at Kirkwood for high school students who want to be teachers. It's 2 of the best hours of my whole week. It's a great experience and an opportunity. But I think what we have to be able to do is say, we want to give you a taste and some specifics of these different careers that you might be interested in right now as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. But we want to do it in a way where we're providing you generalizable skills that you can use in lots of different situations. And part of, this is what's challenging about TEAS. This is one of my other sort of go-to stories. I went to a presentation a couple years ago from a guy whose job title was educational evangelist for Google. That was his job title. And he was going around the country talking to people about how we should be looking at, the future of education. And he used the example of, he pulled his cell phone out and he said, my daughter's in kindergarten right now. This is the worst piece of technology she will ever use. Everything she uses from this point on will get better and better and more efficient and more powerful and all that, right? And with teaching, sometimes we have to think about, are we preparing teachers who are still going to be teaching in 10 or 20 years to be moving into a world that's changing in lots of different ways? Or are we preparing them for the world we lived in? And I think that's a challenge. And so that's a long way, Grace, to get back to your question of, I think we have to do this in a way where we're valuing lots of professions. We're giving students lots of opportunities to explore different professions. If they have a particular interest, absolutely capitalize on it when they're a young person, but don't make it so specific that they never have an opportunity, or they feel like I've kind of pigeonholed myself. I would even argue back, with the legislative ideas. I think any support we can have for programs like Educators Rising and Aspiring Educators that are programs for high school students and even middle school students who are thinking about teaching, I think those are very, very valuable programs. And we try to work with all of our partners in those areas as well.
With the way that education is moving, I wonder if there's even room for part-time educators who have other full-time professions who can bring that expertise into the classroom. Are we seeing that in the state?
I mean, we collect data at the state level about the number of part-time educators. It's remained relatively stable, and the numbers aren't that high. It's anywhere from 700 to 500 in any given year. The vast majority are folks that are full-time, everyday public school teachers.
I could riff on that just a bit of a different way too, Grace, which is thinking about the full-time student who's also doing part-time work in the school. I mean, that's the audience I see every day in my building. So a couple of things. We're able to schedule some of our classes so that they're all in the morning at a school. Particularly, we work with Waterloo Community Schools on this. And then it leaves the afternoon open, and then the district comes in and invites and asks, do you want to be a paraeducator in the afternoon? And we have a strong interest in that from our students who are full-time students, and then also contributing back part-time to schools. It's like a threefer for them. It's a win-win-win. They earn some income while they're a college student, and they're getting that great experience, and they're helping some staffing shortages. So that's one thing. The other thing is we're seeing a great increase of our college students, again, full-time college students, who are quite interested in being substitute teachers when they want. And so just this year, since January, we've submitted to the state almost 260 sub-authorization approvals so that they can get a sub-authorization. And then students may have Fridays open or again, really trying to target some part-time work back to help some critical staffing needs.
Going back to, students being paras, we're seeing that with high school students too. Being paraeducators, getting their foot in the door to teaching and exploring if it's a career that they really want to go into and have a passion for.
Yeah, I think Mark mentioned it, but I think this Ed Rising program that we're trying to get off the ground in various districts, just to have like a club kind of program in middle school and high school for people to explore whether or not they want to be educators. I've seen some of that happen where some of those high schoolers might have a free block or free couple blocks, then end up getting hired on to fill para roles. And I think that's been a real great experience for those high school students in where that's allowed.
Yeah, and I know Colleen mentioned it, but the Grow Your Own programs in some school districts are really helpful because it starts those kids in high school that have an interest in education on the right track, and then they can go to community college and then finish and get that bachelor's degree, maybe in an accelerated fashion or at least closer to home, and then they come back to their school district and continue teaching. And then just to highlight again, Jay brought it up, the Teacher and Paraeducator Registered Apprenticeship Program, TPRA. That's another way to get high school students that para certificate and get them into the classroom quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think from a legislative perspective, the question earlier is extending that past December of 2026. When I was in Storm Lake, they've had a lot of success, especially trying to get diversify their workforce, to get they do a dual language program where they get half the day in English, half the day in Spanish. And so they've been having a lot of success using that program to train people that already are can speak both languages, but are working as paras, helping them become teachers to be able to make that program work and expand it to upper grades. And they were worried about the ending of that grant program, about their ability to continue that work and continue to expand that process.
You said that expires December of next year?
Yeah, December 26.
Okay, yeah. So would that be something the legislature would have to address this coming session, it sounds like? Or, I mean, if it were
if they wanted it to happen past starting in January, otherwise they have to get on it right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joshua, would you mind sharing a little bit more about how you became a teacher and worked in special education?
Yeah. So I started my career, or while I was in college, I went and worked for Co-College Upward Bound in Cedar Rapids over the summer, and just fell in love with the ability to help students figure some things out, seeing those lights turn on in their eyes. And it was just a great experience. Before that, I was looking at law or looking at seminary. I hadn't really decided my for sure path. But I was able to do that my summers after my freshman year of college and my sophomore years in college, and just fell in love with it and switched to education, and graduated, and I subbed for the first year. I was trying to be a social studies teacher, to be completely transparent on that. At that time, it was really difficult to find social studies jobs. And my wife's a teacher too. She's a science teacher. Science wasn't a shortage area at that time either. And so we were both applying all over the state. And either one of us would get an interview and an offer, or the other one would, but we just never found a place where both of us were getting that offer at the same time. She graduated a year before me. She got a job in Des Moines, teaching science. And I went and applied to be a special ed, or just a substitute teacher in Des Moines. And they had a pathway or program, because special education was a shortage area, a program in which they would help support me in getting an emergency license. Even then, it was a shortage area, right? And so I went through a program where I got an emergency license, worked on my master's degree while being a first-year teacher and a second-year teacher, adding a lot of stress to my plate, but got that degree, and just loved working with students one-on-one and providing all of that additional support. And eventually a social studies job opened up in my school, and I was able to move into that role, but continue to support special education students in various ways. And it's just been an awesome experience as a teacher. There's a lot of, as I travel around the state, doesn't matter the size of the school district, there are great things happening in every single one of our public schools across the state of Iowa. And hoping to be able to continue to uplift some of those great experiences, because I think if those experiences were uplifted more than attacks against educators and attacks against the profession, I think that would help address this as well. I think people are be more willing to go into the profession if they knew that they were going to be respected, and they knew that the state and their community and their administration and all their colleagues would have their backs in what is a very difficult, tough job. And it's not easy, but it's a lot of fun. If you want to be a teacher, I highly recommend it.
Well, I just want to remind our audience, if you have any last questions, please populate them in the chat. But Joshua, could you talk about that a little bit more? You started teaching at a time when there was a lot of competition for teaching jobs. And now I think it was Michelle who said districts could be receiving 1 or 2 applicants. So what has that been like for you to watch that change?
Yeah, I think Jay mentioned the teacher leadership compensation program. I think that's part of that competition. I mean, it created another, like a career ladder pathway. It was supposed to be temporary. Like people were supposed to go into that and then come back to the classroom when it first got started. And we've had people go into those roles and stay in them because we've created flexibility. We've allowed people to do that. They've in some places, they've turned into pathways into administration. And so it's kind of a step stool, a career ladder to administration more than a opportunity to stay a teacher and be able to help and support. And so when you have a lot more of those roles that aren't in the classroom, nothing against the program itself. I think it was intended to do a lot of good things, and in many places it still is. But when you create more roles out of the classroom, you create you create less competition for those classroom roles. I think that's part of it. I think there's also a piece of, like, as Jay mentioned, there's more teachers now than there was a decade ago. But not all of those teachers are teaching in classrooms, which has impacted class size and has impacted some of the other things that we talked about earlier. So I think as a teacher, I know how important this profession is, and I know how much our educators care about their students and care about the profession, care about their jobs, and want things to go well. And I think that there are opportunities for us to continue to uplift some of that work, because I do believe that there are people sitting in middle school classrooms as students and high school classrooms right now, and even in colleges, and possibly even working in other careers, who would make tremendous teachers, and have that heart and would love to be part of this. And we just got to find them and get them connected and make sure that they know that there are great opportunities. And there's sometimes you start in one district and some teachers leave the profession altogether, when what they really probably maybe should have done is go try another district, because there's different experiences. There's pros and cons of every school district, every working condition. And so it's just from my perspective, it's still a great profession. And I think that it's still something that's worth going after and worth protecting.
Well, with our last 5 minutes, I'd love to open the floor to our other panelists for any last words you might have.
So I just wanted to mention just a little bit along what we've been talking about, which is, sort of the supply and demand end of this equation of the teacher pipeline itself. So just focusing on like the supply end, Mark and Colleen, I mean, in your roles as dean and trying to continue to keep your programs rich, just a couple of data points that I think is really important, and that is the number of teachers that are actually in teacher prep programs across the state. So there's 29 programs with over 150 different endorsement types that are available. But currently, I should say in the most recent year available, we had 7,586 teachers in teacher prep programs, which is about 500 more than there was a decade ago, which was 6,913. And the other piece, so there's a lot of interest in becoming a teacher. And of those that actually complete, again, in the most recent year, we had 2,159 teacher candidates graduate that are available, to fill the vacancies that exist, which is the second highest number of graduates than has existed across, again, that last decade. So we know that there's that supply side is strong, and so what are the strategies we can do to try to get folks into the vacancies and then support them into having hopefully fruitful and long-term careers in education.
Jay, is there any data on how many of those 2,159 stayed in Iowa versus going to like Illinois or Minnesota or somewhere else?
Well, that's the most recent year that we have, and no, we know who stays in state. We don't know if they've left to go be a teacher somewhere else or if they go onto another career.
Well, thanks for those data, Jay. That was my final line too. Is the good news that I can share from you and I is 2 weeks ago when we took our fall census, we have 604 new students who are pursuing teacher education, and that's across our various endorsement areas. What I think is interesting about that number is a little more than half of that number are traditional undergraduate freshmen, but the other almost half are transfer students. And so resonating with what we've talked about, and there are people everywhere looking to take their expertise and their interest and become teachers. 9 of those are at the graduate level. We've just started a program, as I mentioned, with career changers seeking initial licensure. So we have good news that way. And I would just double down on what Joshua said. You know, if we really want to change the conversation about teaching, we need to shift the spotlight. There's excellence happening in every school, in every district across our state. Stories of teachers who are transforming lives every day. And educators are the quiet heroes of our community. And wouldn't it be great if we could focus on those stories instead of just when there's crisis in a school? I really do believe we'd see more young people choosing teaching because they'd see themselves as part of something not only noble, but impactful. And I think this generation really wants to see how they can impact others. And so thank you, Joshua, for opening that line. It's really important that we're clear about the narrative about this very important and quite rewarding profession.
I would just say, number one, thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate this. Appreciate Grace sort of corralling all of us. That was nice of you. And I think this demonstrates 2 things. One, sometimes there's a narrative that some of the entities even represented here don't always work together. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite of that. I mean, I think some people might be surprised that you and I and University of Iowa get together and chat a little bit about how we're doing teacher ed. And we do a lot of that. I think people might be surprised that we work with the Department of Ed as closely as we do, or we work with the School Board Association, or we work with ISE. I think one of the things to keep in mind is how collectively we have a lot of different entities that represent different viewpoints, but we all want the same thing. We want effective learning environments for every student in the state, and we're all working together to do that. And then the second thing is, I think Colleen and I are very fortunate. We get to see exactly what I'm going to echo, basically what she said about what Josh said. Every single day I get to see a whole bunch of young people who really don't just want to have a job. They are committed to being an effective educator for students, and they want to help other human beings. And that's what's really exciting for me, that I don't have to see people who are just sort of going through the motions. These are people who really, really care. So appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk a little bit about that.
All right. Well,
I guess I can go last and just echo that I get the privilege of seeing public schools in action all the time. Much of my job is centered around talking to legislators, and so I get to share these stories with them. And at the heart of all those stories is a teacher. There's no innovative program or student succeeding without a teacher behind that. And so that's really the privilege that I get to speak to, is seeing all of their hard work come together and share it to those people who are maybe making decisions. So yeah, thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you for those uplifting final words, and thank you for joining us. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, for their support, and our panelists for your insight and expertise. And have a great Iowa Ideas Conference.